Good morning. Thank you for hosting me.
Yes, Piet, it's a pleasure having you with us this morning. Now, let's just talk a bit before we get to the issue. And I know you are talking about not about expropriation without compensation, but more like confiscation. But just as far as these hearings that are taking place, and we know this amendment of Section 25 to the Constitution, the hearings are taking place. What do we know so far? What has been taking place?
Well, 3 years ago, the motion to amend the Constitution to facilitate expropriation without compensation was passed in the South African Parliament. It was proposed by the EFF, the Economic Freedom Fighters political party, and was subsequently amended and adopted with the assistance of the African National Congress, the ANC. And thereafter, an ad hoc committee was appointed, and the committee was asked to recommend to Parliament whether the Constitution should be changed to make expropriation without compensation possible, whether it's necessary to change the Constitution. That committee, by the end of 2018, returned an answer to Parliament and a report and said, yes, it should be amended. Then in 2019, another ad hoc committee was appointed, and this time the committee was asked to develop a draft amendment bill to amend the Constitution. That committee then, through some delays, including lockdown, etc., brought us to the point where we are today, where a draft Constitution Amendment Bill, the Constitution 18th Amendment Bill, is being proposed. And this this bill, proposes to inject certain words into the Article or Section 25 of the South African Constitution, which is the property rights clause. And the consequence of that will be that the state has the power to expropriate without paying any compensation. And that, we say, the correct term for that is confiscation.
Yes. Now, obviously, Piet, the whole question surrounding the controversy of land expropriation without compensation, and this amendment in particular as well, has been questionable in terms of whether there has been justification for an amendment or the Section 25 of the Constitution that needed to be amended.
Right. So can I just make sure I understand your question, whether it is really necessary or not to do it?
Yes.
Yeah, so our argument is that you would have to change the text of the Constitution to make it possible to expropriate without compensation. But even if you do it, that would fly in the face of the requirements of constitutionalism itself. So our argument is that it is impossible for any constitution in the world for it to be a proper constitution, to make it possible to confiscate property, that is, to take something without paying compensation. Now, there are examples in all jurisdictions across the world, any constitutional order, where the states sometimes take possession of assets. For example, during a process called asset forfeiture, governments or states might take possessions ill-gotten from criminals and say, okay, we'll take this and we'll do something else with it. But that is when someone was a criminal. But no criminal considerations are listed here. What the government now seeks to do is to take something without paying compensation, just by initiating it by itself. Now, as the Parliament's own legal advisory committee and legal advisory service told it, it is the concept of expropriation is married to the concept of compensation. In all jurisdictions in the world, the legal concept of expropriation entails compensation. Now, we can discuss the quantum of that compensation. We can discuss whether it should be market value, whether there should be a solatium, something on top of it for the trouble of being expropriated, etc. But we cannot say that there cannot be any expropriation. May I add something? Because of what government's trying to do, or the state now, actually, the state, this ad hoc committee is trying to do, is it realize that there's a problem, and its own legal service advised it that there's a problem with using expropriation without compensation. So the bill that's being tabled actually uses the words expropriation at nil compensation. And this we call a public law legal fraud, because it achieves the same objective as no compensation, but the ad hoc committee is trying to avoid admitting that that is what it seeks to do.
Yes. Now, we've also learned, Pete, that there have been many submissions that have been opposed to the constitutional amendment at this point in time. And the fact of the matter, and I think you make it very, very clear, and when you talk about confiscation, and you also, the point, and I'm just referring to this article that's here, where you talk about, the links between the Constitution and the markets.
Yeah, there's an unseverable link between a constitutional order and the economy, and that is it was well put by the post-war German-Austrian economist Wilhelm Röpke when he said that there's a socio-moral pattern in society, or we called it a bürgerliche order, or a constitutionally minded order, into which markets and economies are embedded, and central to that is the respect for property. Respect for the different spheres of authority and power and rights and what is proper to people in society. This links very well with the arguments by also one of the people who submitted on our, who assisted us with our submission, Professor Koos Malan, who is a professor of public law at the University of Pretoria, who points out that constitutionalism is a concept, a constitutional order is something where there is a distribution of power and where the citizens of such an order, the participants to such an order, are able to participate in the workings in the polity with their means, which is their property. And when you have an arrangement that seeks to introduce into legislation something that removes that ability to participate in the polity in their own right, that seeks to favor the concentration of power into the hands of the state to the detriment of the other participants in the polity, then you have something that is fundamentally unconstitutional, and it is impossible to introduce this into the Constitution's text and the Constitution then remain a valid constitution.
Yes. Now, obviously, Pete, this can get very, very technical. Can become very, very legal as well from what the discussion that you and I are having. But just looking at it for the man in the street, what does this mean for the man in the street in terms of how this is likely to impact on him?
The likely process now will be that the parliamentary committee will propose the introduction of expropriation without compensation into the constitution. They will call it expropriation at nil compensation. That will probably succeed because the ANC and the EFF will probably say yes to it, and then that will become part of the constitution's text. But that's not where it ends, even if this comes to pass, because it will create a certain obligation on us as Sakeliga, me personally as a participant in this polity, but also all listeners and anybody else affected or participating in this polity, in this society, in this state. It will create the obligation for us to not accept this constitutional amendment because it is fundamentally unconstitutional and it is incompatible with the principles of a constitutional order. And it will be incumbent upon us to engage in a long-term campaign, a perpetual if necessary, to restore the proper constitution and restore proper working constitutional order. So insofar as this amendment will be put into the constitution, and insofar as it will be given effect, it will detract from the legality and the legitimacy of the constitution's text, and it will be incumbent upon us to rectify that. We shall not accept it, and we must not accept it.
Well, Pete, thank you very much for that and for your time with us this morning here on News and Views and Salam Media. All the best to you.
Thank you very much.
Piet le Roux joining us this morning, talking about land expropriation without compensation, more like land confiscation, and this is what MPs have been told. And these hearings obviously are continuing, and we know that these public hearings will continue. We will have more submissions from even the likes of traditional leaders and agricultural organizations on this highly, highly controversial topic. And with that, we are heading towards closure, the time heading towards 10 a.m. And once again, from myself and the rest of the team, it's been great. It's been wonderful being in your company this morning on News and Views. Until we meet tomorrow, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.